I think, yeah, I think Africa is rising.
Oh baby, Africa is rising. You want to take that parachute. You want to be with us when you rise.
In many different aspects, yes, Africa is rising.
I think we've risen in many ways.
Yes, well, I think Africa is rising because
there's all sorts of indications that Africa is becoming a continent that's going to need to be reckoned with. There's lots of economic development in Africa. There's a pretty widespread sort of spread of democratic movements coming up. A lot of the old dictatorships are falling apart. And I think Africa is also rising in terms of its own confidence and its own understanding of itself and its role in the world. And it's certainly, I think, going to be a continent that is going to need to be reckoned with.
Well, yes, in my opinion, Africa's rising.
It's a complex question. I mean, if you look at GDP and so on, the economies are obviously rising.
Wow, is Africa rising?
Okay, I'll be very frank with that. No, it is not rising.
I've got less optimistic views about that, and I think that they're taking the growth figures for Africa as a kind of a beacon, whereas it's based, of course, on a very small and narrow base.
We've come a long way from our history and from just being a country that has been considered underdeveloped by other countries. I think we have made steps forward to make sure that we develop as a country in our own way and not so much in the eyes of like Western society. So we're developing as our country, we're finding our own identity as Africans, and we
Our economic system has risen a lot, and I think that we've made great strides in that field, and we're just going further and further, and the nation has come together very well.
Africa was always about the relic of Renaissance and a term called Ubuntu. Now people have lost that sentiment, and they've kind of brashed into things that are distant, Western.
Wealth inequalities within African countries, how the monies are used, so that you don't just have this self-enriching middle class.
In terms of media, I think that we have a good open media with good media freedom.
Well, I think individuals are rising and a lot of people are getting left behind.
The growth rate of African countries has up to now been relatively slow. So if there is a spurt in the growth rate, it is manifested in rather large figures or larger figures, which gives the impression that the country is really, or at least the continent is really growing quite substantially. So I have reservations about those figures.
I think we're starting to take notice that we are actually working just as hard as the rest of the world, if not even harder, and that there's a whole other aspect of us that we're itching to show the world. And I think How Africa is just that platform for us to start off showing that aspect. And so I think it's rising in that way, in the fact that we have this itch to show the world a different side to ourselves.
I think the important thing that we need to realize as Africans is that we shouldn't be living to meet other continents or other continents' expectations or their achievements. We need to look at ourselves as a continent within our own context.
Well, but it also depends on how the rest of the world chooses to look at Africa, because most of the time you find that the Americans have this perspective that Africa is just poverty all the time, and they will always just depict that, and which I feel is like just greatly unfair and just American, typical American. That's all I can say for that. But Africa has grown, Africa has improved greatly.
Okay.
Obviously, some people would say that we're still facing a couple of issues or whatever the case is, but how long is that going to be going on for? It takes many, many decades, centuries for things to come into play, and by that time as well, we'll still have to be measuring up to everybody's standards. So Africa has risen, and we're happy, and we're just fine.
Bye.